Hi, Wes here. Thanks for joining me today. And today I want to show you how to make a real simple no-coil primitive bowl, just like this one. We're going to make one exactly like this, although we're not going to fire and paint it. These are surprisingly easy to make, and they don't require a lot of equipment, and they don't require very much skill either. So the trick here is to use the right kind of pookie. This is the pookie I'm going to use. You'll see, in fact, that this is the pookie that I had. And the clay always shrinks up some, but you need to have the right kind of pookie. And in this case, I bought this at Target. It cost about $20. If you go to the Goodwill or those kinds of stores, sometimes you can find something that is the right shape and the right size for you. But you want a good size pookie. And the bowl will end up being just a little bit taller than the pookie. But again, we're not going to need to build a coil with it. I'll show you how we're going to just do the whole thing. And is this completely authentic? No, it isn't. But from my view is that humans have always used whatever tools they had available. I'm sure that Native Americans, when they were making pottery 700-800 years ago, they used whatever they had, and people are pretty inventive. So do I bend the rules a little bit? Yeah, sure, but not very much. This is still primitive pottery. When I say primitive, I think it's going to be hand-built, so we're not going to use a wheel. I'm using wild clay. You don't have to. Actually, Randy Ward did a great video here 2-3 years ago about using commercial clay, so you could do that. This is fired with either wood or charcoal. I don't recall. I think charcoal. Lots of primitive pottery is done that way. But if you don't have access to that, that's fine. Yeah, use a regular electric kiln that might be available locally for you. However you want to do it. But this is a hand-built, easy, no-coil pot. So let's get started. All right, to get started, obviously we need some clay. This is wild clay. Again, you don't need to use wild clay. This has about 20% temper in it. And we're going to use a rolling pin. This is a 2-inch dowel that I got at Home Depot. Came in a 3-foot length. I cut it into 3 pieces. So I have 3 different rolling pins. You could use one out of your kitchen too. Not a problem. I'm going to use some sticks here as spacers. You'll see how I use that. But this is one way of making sure that your clay is consistent thickness throughout. You don't need to do this. You could pat this out by hand. This will give you a more consistent and even product. But maybe you like it real rustic. That's up to you. We need a piece of cloth. If you don't use cloth, what will happen is your clay probably is just going to stick to your surface. And we're going to have to flip this over multiple times. So start getting this thing flattened out. We need enough clay to do our whole pot. Again, we're not going to use any coiling here. So hopefully I have as much as I need. I think so. Start with probably more than you think you need, because you can always cut it off. We will cut it off, in fact. So we just start rolling it out, and we want it to roll it out just like a pie, more or less. It'd be easier if it's more or less round. And you can pat this out by hand if you want. It will be not as consistent, but if you want to do it that way, that's fine. However you want to do it. You'll find that once you start rolling it out, it starts to, doesn't roll out as easy, so you have to flip it over from time to time. And that makes it a little easier. So now we're going to start using these little spacer sticks. They're both the same thickness. These are a little less than 1/4 of an inch thick, I think. And by using those beside the clay, it will limit how thin the clay goes. It particularly is helpful on the edge. If you don't use these, the edge tends to be much thinner than the middle. Again, you don't have to do it this way, but it works pretty well. Again, we're trying to make this simple, easy, achievable. I would say that this whole project can be done in maybe a little more than an hour. It sort of depends on you and how you want to handle it. What we're going to do is we're going to shape the bowl first, let it dry some, and then come back and clean it up and smooth it out. And that part even isn't necessary, but it tends to make it nicer. Old sheets work great for this. T-shirts. Certainly don't need a new piece of cloth. It's going to get pretty dirty. We have some extra stuff around the edge. It's easier if we kind of get rid of those. I have a hacksaw blade here. I tell you, this thing is really useful. I use it as a little knife. I use it as a scraper. I use it to clean off my workbench. So our piece of clay, you can see, is a fair amount bigger than our pookie. That's good. This next part, it works nice if you can slide your clay over onto an inverted bowl. I'll show you why here in a second. It's not absolutely necessary. You could just put the clay in the pookie, but what this will do is reduce the number of creases you have in it. So I like plastic scrapers. You could use gourd scrapers, use anything you like. It also works well for me to elevate this so I have more access to it. So the goal is to kind of gently get the clay to bend over the bowl, the inverted bowl. By doing this, you will end up with fewer creases in it. It will make your life a little bit easier. Okay, if you have a lot of excess in some areas, you can cut that off. Get it out of the way. Okay, the next step, and you want to put a cloth over the top of it, particularly if you are using a pookie that is not porous. So if it's wood or fired ceramics, glass, you need this, otherwise it will potentially stick to the pookie. This is a more stretchy material. It's from a t-shirt, I think, and try to get the creases out of it to the extent you can, because they will leave creases in your clay. Not a huge deal. It'll all get fixed in the end, but again, it'll just make your life a little bit easier. And then we take our pookie, invert it, and flip it all over. And take out our other pot. So there we are. To a large extent, this pot is kind of made. I mean, I suppose it would even be possible to just let this dry and have this free-form pot. We're not going to do that. The goal here then is, so you can see I've come up above the rim of the pookie. So that's how we're going to make this bowl a little bit larger so that we don't have to add a coil to it. So the only thing we have to do here now is just kind of carefully get this shaped the way we want. One thing to be a little bit careful with, if you can, there will almost always be a pookie line there. We'll clean that up later. The more you can avoid that, your life gets a little bit easier. Again, it's certainly not the end of the world. And we're just going to slowly get our profile up kind of the way we want it to be. Work out these folds and creases. And this is what you would be doing if you had added a coil. Okay, let's do a real initial trimming. We're going to do a final trimming later, just to get rid of stuff we know we don't need or want. It's never going to be even all around to begin with. We'll take care of that later. It just makes it easier for smoothing out. I use a little X-Acto knife, any kind of knife. You know, if you want to use an obsidian blade, you can do that too. I think we all have to make a decision about just kind of what kind of tools we want to use. But you can see here that I have pretty consistent thicknesses. When you roll it out like I did, that will end up giving you a pretty nice bowl. Okay, we just keep smoothing this out, getting it to be the profile that we want it to be. Again, you don't have to do any of this actually. Once the bowl is basically formed, you can just leave it as it is. However, if you want to paint it, my experience is if a person doesn't have a good paint job, it's often because the pot isn't smooth. You need a nice smooth canvas to do a good paint job. For this next step, I have a banding wheel, which is really handy to have, but it is not necessary. Set your pot on top of the banding wheel, and then what we want to do is use a knife to cut our rim. This, I think, is oftentimes the hardest part of making these pots, is to get a nice even rim. So what I've done is I find something that is the right height. In this case, it is just a container, and I lay the knife on top of it, and then just very slowly. My goal isn't to cut all the way through the clay the first time. I just want to score it. But this will tend to give you a very consistent level rim. And oftentimes it's the rim that you see. If it is inconsistent, lumpy, wavy, kind of detracts from the rest of your pot. Again, you know, it's up to you. All right, so I think I'm pretty well there. So that's pretty even. I'm happy with that. Well, our no-coil pot is starting to look pretty good. I just kind of want to fiddle with it a little bit. Now, you could put a flat rim like this with no profile really to speak of, or you can fold it over, you can fold it out or fold it in, put some flair to it if you like. Certainly not necessary. Some were, some weren't. Just the goal is to be kind of consistent. What I like to do then on the top is kind of smooth that out. I have a little piece of leather. I think you could use cloth for this. You can use your fingers. Get them wet and just kind of smooth out your rim. Get it the way you want it to be. Then take your piece of leather, just fold it over the top, and use that to kind of make your profile. Okay, I would say that we're done for this. Now, what we could do is just let this sit and dry and leave it at that. The next step, though, we're going to do some smoothing on it. But what I need to do is let this set up. So I'm going to cover it, and actually I'm going to wait till tomorrow to make sure that it's good and firm before we go on to the next step. Well, this video has turned out to be longer than I expected it to be, so let's make this episode 1, and then we'll have an episode 2 where I smooth everything out and show you how I do that. That's optional, don't have to do it, but it does make the pot nicer. And so I will release that fairly soon. Thank you for joining me today. Thumbs up and comments, stuff like that always helps. And until episode 2, I wish you health, happiness, peace, and love. Take care. Bye-bye.